What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? We have some great guests. Leigh Finke and Andy Smith, both on the Minnesota State Legislatures. Leigh Finke is the first trans person to represent the state of Minnesota and one of the first in the country. And Andy Smith is just another white guy in politics.
Correct.
Anyway, obviously in a new era, and Trump has signed some executive orders that Leigh has really been wanting to get out and spread some messages about the kind of the dangers of that, what we're doing moving forward, and what the state of Minnesota is doing. And she only has about 10 to 15 minutes to spare with us, and then Andy's going to kind of fill in the space here and talk about what's been going on in Minnesota, how we're progressing that legislation, and so on. So, guys, please introduce yourselves and take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm great to be here talking to that robust, diverse community that you that you called out. My name is Leigh Finke. My pronouns are she, her. I represent St. Paul and a few surrounding suburbs. Um, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be here with Andy, who is one of my favorite white guys at the legislature, for sure.
Which is saying there's a lot of us, so that is a big pool. So I do appreciate you saying that.
I
Hi,
mean
I'm
it.
Andy Smith. I represent Rochester, Minnesota 25B, and likewise happy to be on here talking about what we need to talk about, which is how we can resist and care for one another and make this tough time better through community and through using the power we have.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, I've been talking about the executive orders around trans rights that have been signed by our new president. I think, it's very interesting to experience this in real time, right? Like we had the inauguration 2 days ago. I ignored that. I spent that time with my family and my kids, and just doing things away from the computer, and had a lovely day. And then yesterday, there was this adrenaline of, what does the order say? What are these orders doing? How bad is it going to be? A very analytical day for me of trying to understand what's happening. And then I'll admit I woke up today just feeling horrible. Lots of tears, lots of sadness, a sort of depressive realization that we are in this era in which 48 hours into this administration, Trump has signed executive orders that have removed the legal recognition of trans people fully from the law, that he has signed an executive order that essentially removes any federal legal protections for trans people. And then he signed another one, actually, that got a little less attention, that will remove federal funding from any program or school or anything that even acknowledges the existence of transgender people. Um, it is a terrifying moment. It is very difficult. There is a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot of fear. I think we need to be very clear-eyed about why this is happening and what it's going to mean. But I really wanted to stress for our listeners that just because Donald Trump has signed those papers doesn't make that the reality of our lived experience. Everything is going to be litigated in court. Much of what he signed in his executive orders is just illegal. He ended birthright citizenship by executive order. That's a constitutional protection. He can't just say that. Much of this will not happen. But the real effect of it is to create terror, to create a society where trans people are terrorized, that our communities feel unsafe, that our neighbors feel unsafe. And this is not just happening to us, it's happening to our immigrant communities. It's going to happen to our incarcerated neighbors. It's going to happen over and over and over. And I just think it's really important that we establish clearly this is going to be long and this is going to be difficult, but we are not without power. We have the capacity to resist, especially in Minnesota, where we have the trans refuge bill. Healthcare remains intact, and we have protected it. We also have just a fierce and tremendous Attorney General in Keith Ellison, who has already filed suit against the birthright citizenship. Just this morning on the radio, he expressed his intent to protect the rights of trans people. We are going to rely on Keith Ellison, I'm afraid, far more than we've ever relied on our Attorney General in this state. So I'm grateful to have him in office and as a partner in this work for justice. I think I'll pass it over to Andy if you have any thoughts to add.
Yeah, just like to amplify, I think what Leigh said is we have to catch this balance of realizing the weight of the moment and what is happening and being cleared out, really about the rise of authoritarian fascism in the United States, while also realizing that we are not powerless. One of the major weapons in the arsenal of authoritarian regimes is to make the people feel powerless. And we are not to that place yet, and we need to continue to organize, be loud, and particularly be loud if you aren't part of these communities. They should not be out there alone. They should not be having to fight for their own rights without brothers and sisters and non-binary people next to them saying that these are Minnesotans too. Minnesota is for everybody, and standing on that principle. And the first part of doing that is doing that loudly, but also a call to support should really be throughout our communities, both locally and at the state level.
I absolutely agree. I think it was really encouraging. I went and did Taylor and I both went out to the march to St. Paul and saw you speak, Leigh, the People's March on Saturday, and it was really encouraging and really, I think, powerful to see all of the people rallying around the cause and rallying around the community. Because there was a lot of people who looked like me and a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily be as affected out there willing to, stand in the 4-degree cold and show our support, because trans rights, women's rights, all of those are human rights, and we'll all lose our rights if we don't protect everybody's rights. And I really appreciate the work you've been doing. I know that we've been working hard on the ERA here in Minnesota, and now obviously we've got some finicky things going on in the Minnesota State Legislature with Republicans doing, Republican shit, as they always seem to do. And do you think that this is going to put new obstacles in the way of getting some of this legislation passed and protecting these people in our community here in Minnesota?
I mean, I definitely think so. I am the lead author of the ERA this year. I'm very excited and honored to have that responsibility. But yes, I mean, just downright frankly, we debated the ERA for 15 hours last year in the Minnesota House. We just ran out of time. The Senate wasn't able to pass it. It was essentially the Republicans' most targeted bill to oppose. And the truth is, without the trifecta, that bill will not be passing. We just need to be honest about it. I will introduce it. I will build my authorship, right, amongst the community that has been fighting for this for decades and decades. But it's going to be difficult, right? This is different. We had a trifecta, and now we do not. And this morning, more than anything, that's what I have realized. Life is going to feel very different for us, Andy. And we need to pace ourselves, and we need to be responsible, and we need to make sure that when we reclaim power in 2026, which I fully expect, we are positioned to make our priorities ready to pass.
Yeah, and just to maybe bring, like, if people aren't following really closely what's happening in St. Paul, like the recent election, we are divided in the Minnesota House, equal numbers of Democrats, equal number of Republicans, or at least we expect that's what we're going to be after a special election that will be held in the coming weeks. And so if we don't have a Republican to vote on a bill with us, that bill won't be able to pass. And unfortunately, the modern Republican Party is not going to support the ERA. So things like that are going to be very, very difficult. But as Leigh said, I am optimistic that in 2026, we are going to have hopefully another trifecta, but I think there will be a huge movement towards what I would call more Minnesota inclusive values, and we need to be ready for that. And by the way, I would put a plug in also as we were feeling so discouraged this morning, as I echo Leigh, just like feeling awful this week. There is another election in 2026 for the House of Representatives, and that will give, that's something we can look to as a place where we can once again grasp power to fight against this regime. So, again, just to emphasize, we're not completely powerless. Politics is not didn't end in November 2024 or January 20th, and we can't let that. So the people who will allow that to happen is if we all of a sudden get quiet, if we all of a sudden don't stand up for one another, and if we all of a sudden pretend like it is.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just want to echo that, like, what's happening in the Minnesota House right now is it's really terrible, and it's really unfortunate, but it is temporary. And we do have an obligation as legislators to pass a budget, right? There will be a time this year, hopefully quite soon, when we actually start working again. And the good thing about politics is that people can move on pretty quickly, right? We see this all the time. It's like, okay, well, this terrible thing happened and everything is over and we're doomed. And then a week later, there's a power sharing agreement and we're negotiating on a budget. And I think that, like, the moment, the federal moment feels so overwhelming, right? Trump's election is so overwhelming. And I mean, it has overwhelmed me today. But we are state legislators, and we will go back to the state house and we will continue to do our jobs. And I just think it's really important for people to know that we're not doing this because we think it's fun. I think it's terrible. Actually, I can't wait to go. I love my job. I can't wait to do it. I have a really great bill to require water at all public events, and I want to get in there and make the case for it. But in the meantime, we have to do what we're doing because there has to be a democratic norms. Otherwise, everything is going to fall apart. And with that, I actually do need to let you guys go today. I'm really grateful for your invitation. I would love to come back later on. I'll have more time, but this is just a moment of intense busyness and work. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. We'd love to have you back anytime you want. Just reach out and we'd have you back. Thank you again. If you don't know who Leigh is, to everybody listening, please go check her out and stick around because we're going to be talking with Andy about kind of the nitty gritty of how we move forward. So thank you so much, Leigh. Keep up the great fight, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thanks, all.
Bye, Leigh. A couple people in the chat said that I'm hard to hear. Can you guys hear me a little better? I tried to turn up my gain.
Yeah, you were a shade quiet, but I could still hear you. It was just a little quiet.
Is it better at all now?
I think that's.
I mean, I can hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Cool. Yeah, I've been just obviously really disheartened with everything that's been going on, and really frustrating to see how poorly Republicans in our state, because usually they're a little less, Looney Tunes than in other states where they kind of don't have the accountability that they do here, with Democrats generally wielding slightly more power, but being sort of on a pretty decent power sharing field. And I'm curious. So for everybody who doesn't know what's going on, I'll let you explain what's going on in the state legislature right now.
Yeah, sure. I'm getting good at this. Like in every meeting with constituents now, you have to give my 3-minute overview explanation. So thank you for that. So in November, as I mentioned earlier, the people of Minnesota voted for an exact tie in the Minnesota House of Representatives, 67 Democrats, 67 Republicans. It's only the second time in state history that it ever happened. That only happened in 1978. And obviously, this is a very different time that we are at currently. So very unusual. We immediately we being the Democratic caucus that I'm a part of, with the Republican caucus, started doing power sharing agreements, and it's actually progressing weirdly well. We're going to have equal numbers of people on every committee. We were going to have co-speakerships, all that kind of stuff, try to figure out a way. As Leigh said, we have to pass a budget. This is a budget year. If we don't pass a budget by July 1st, there's a little state government shutdown, which is horrible for so many reasons. So we were progressing. In December, there are 2 court cases that really sort of threw a wrench into those power sharing agreements and led to the, whatever you want to call it, chaos that is happening right now in a fake House of Representatives. So two court cases. One was around a man called Curtis Johnson, who ran and won a seat in the Roseville area. A judge ruled that he did not meet the residency requirements to have run for that seat, despite the fact that he did get the most votes for that seat. And so he decided that he wasn't going to contest that, and he was going to abide by the court decision, and he resigned his seat basically before he even took his seat in a letter to the governor. The other one is about Representative Brad Tapke, who won election. Both these are DFL representatives in Shakopee, the surrounding area, and it was an incredibly tight election. He won by 15 votes. So if you out there and you ever think your vote does not matter, this is clear evidence that it does. 15 votes. And that was so tight that it triggered an automatic recount. We just do that in Minnesota to be sure. And in this recount, there came to light that 20 ballots by a human error had been lost in this count. And so that led to this court case. Now, the good news is the county who does the count or the actual vote counting knew who those 20 people were. So under oath, they asked a good amount of them, I think the number was 12, to testify who they voted for. And they didn't release all of those because not everyone wanted that to be public, but 6 people were willing to be publicly stated again under oath in this court case that they voted for Brad Tapke, which means, mathematically, that Brad Tapke is the duly elected member of that seat. Now, what those two things did that led to the chaos in January is because Curtis didn't take his seat, technically, until a special election was held, there were less Democrats than Republicans in the House, 67-66. And with that, the Republicans wanted to pretend like they were a majority. Now, this is a very important point. There are 134 seats in the Minnesota House of Representatives, with, again, mathematically, you have to get 68 seats to actually have a majority, which they don't have. We also don't have. No one has. And that's very important because legislative bodies really run based on the majority if you have enough votes to pass law. And this is set in the Minnesota Constitution. This is not like something I'm making up. It's a very clear, and I can quote verse and statute if people want, but that's kind of where we were at. And so the Republicans said, we are going to act like the majority, and even more, once we get all the power that we can have, we are actually going to get rid of Brad Tapke. We think that is still an illegitimate election, even though a judge said it was a good election. We are going to get rid of him. And there's several other things that they have threatened to do that made it to the point where we as a Democratic caucus said we cannot be a party to this. At its core, this is about voting rights, and that when people are elected, they need to be able to hold their seat. And so we had one big sort of tool in our toolbox to stop this from happening. And it's called denying quorum, which is, a kind of silly parliamentary thing. But basically what that means is we, the Democratic caucus, all 66 of us, are not in the same room when they try to begin session. And since we are not in the room, there is not a quorum. Quorum is a very important concept, again, in the U.S. Constitution, basically saying there are enough people here that it constitutes a majority of Minnesota so decisions can be made. If the Democrats aren't there, they don't have quorum, they can't do anything. And so on the first day, the Secretary of State, who presides over the House at this point, said there aren't enough people here for quorum, and he gavelled out. Then the Republicans did something truly outrageous, which is they just went up, grabbed the gavel, and started having fake House of Representative meetings. They had fake committee meetings. They passed rules to allow their taking out of Brad Tapke, all in this fake session. And to bring us up to today, we still are denying them quorum, so nothing in our view is official what they're doing, and we have sued them in the Supreme Court. Oral arguments will be heard tomorrow in the Minnesota Supreme Court to rule, hopefully, that what they did was unconstitutional, and then we'll sort of be back at square one of hopefully getting some power sharing. So I know that was a really brief overview, and I might have missed some details, but that's where we're at right now in Minnesota.
Well, and on top of that, the Republicans, when they're in their fake session in Congress, allowed themselves to use my money, taxpayers' money, to pay their lawyers to try to make their pretend session legitimate, right? And the DFL is not doing that. The DFL is using party funds.
That is a great emphasis. Yeah, so suing anything anywhere is very expensive, especially in these high-stakes scenarios. The House Caucus and the DFL party have hired outside counsel that we pay for with campaign and state party dollars. no taxpayer dollars. Everyone gave that money to us willingly, saying we believe in this party and what you need to do, and this is what we're doing with that money. The Republicans, in a fake rules session, it's a 4-minute and 30-second long committee meeting where they passed a resolution that they can use public funds to hire their representation in the Supreme Court. And you even left out the worst part. The lawyers that they hired are part of the firm where their majority leader is a partner. So it's not just misuse of public funds, it's misuse of public funds that is directly going to corruption. So
conflict
true
of
colors
interest is like,
yeah, true colors are being shown. I mean, this is, and Leigh mentioned this earlier when we were talking to her, this is part of the new Republican Party and the playbook that they have all learned. Take the reins of power, fake it till you make it, don't listen to the actual will of the people, and when you do that, you can actually make some money too, some graft off of this in your own pockets as well, while also passing a completely unpopular agenda and platform that Minnesotans don't want, which is why they're not in power legitimately.
And so, a couple of questions. So, being that it's the House, there's obviously more steps to laws being passed than, a law being passed in the House. I mean, I forget what the Senate split is like. I think it's also pretty darn 50-50 or close to that. What are the chances that anything that they do, other than obviously if a court rules, the Supreme Court rules what they do and is legitimate, it would affect the House for the next couple of years, but possibly wouldn't really, mean that any of the laws that they pass with the majority from the time that they have it would actually, go anywhere, right?
Yeah, I think there's two separate questions there that are good to like delineate, which is like one, this fake session, what's happening with the other branches of government? Like, are they recognizing it? And the answer is no, thankfully. The governor has not recognized their ability to organize. And actually the Senate, which, as you mentioned, is evenly divided right now, 33-33, Democrats and Republicans, and they're in a power sharing situation. They have not recognized the House either. So no official body has recognized sort of their faux bills or their faux, whatever's. But I will say somewhat concerningly, institutionally, there have been some people who have basically continued to go along with it. Primarily, it's unfortunate because these are, nonpartisan staff members, but they've continued to like stream these fake House things. And as I said, they're using state funds even in like the labor of those people to make this continue to go. So that is concerning, and I think there should be some justice for that if it is ruled to be unconstitutional. Now, the other question that I think behind that is, what if they were in power? Like, let's just say that we had shown up, not denying them quorum, and they were a Republican-led House. And really what that means is every single bill would be a Republican bill in the House, because when people are in majorities, they control the speakership, and the speaker controls what bills actually come to the floor. So it would affect very clearly even bills that Governor Walz would have to sign into law, because every single budget bill has to originate in the House. That's constitutional. And even though the Senate still has to pass it and then has to be signed by the governor, also keep in mind that like government shutdowns are not something that we want to do. And there have been split governments before where, things like Medicaid funding or, you can go down the list, like are affected if they have power. And even more, I think, broader, more important things would also be affected. But that might not want to get into details quite yet, but that is the stakes that we are on currently. Did that answer the question accurately?
Yeah, so kind of your biggest concern, if this kind of continues, is the budget aspect of it, not necessarily that they're going to be able to pass some sort of like just pro, MAGA Republican agenda that has no reflection upon what voters actually wanted.
I mean, yes and no. So what I'm mainly concerned about, honestly, why we're denying quorum, is that if we set a precedent that one caucus can just vote out another member in the House, regardless of what the electors said, that is a stage for authoritarianism and statewide totalitarian authoritarianism, where just whoever's in control can continue to be in control forever and ever and ever because they just keep voting out members. And that is scary. And I think that's at heart of it. And then there's some major stuff that would happen if Republicans got control, which is why I'm glad the people of Minnesota didn't give it to them legitimately. But I mean, things like last time we passed universal school meals for every Minnesotan. One of their faux bills is to take away that requirement. So school districts can choose to do that or not. And to be quite frank, a lot of school districts will choose not to do that. So that will all of a sudden go away as a benefit for probably hundreds of thousands of kids. I mean, that's just that one example of a way that it would really affect daily life in Minnesota if that were to happen.
Right. Presumably, if they did, put that bill out, it would have to be signed by Governor Walz, though, before anything happens, right?
Correct, but
Okay.
it would be one of those discussions where it was either government shutdown or that, and government
Got
shutdowns
it.
also
It's like
affect people's lives. I mean, that sounds, especially if you're like a sort of anti-government person out there, which I understand there are. I come from that stock. They might think like, government shutdown, that's totally fine. But what that means is like every government employee, including everyone from state patrol officers to actuaries at the Department of Revenue, aren't getting paid. That means that Medicaid, our medical assistant bills are not getting paid to hospitals. So hospitals are out money. They might furlough staff. I mean, it really, until, we see it go away, people don't understand how influential government is really in our everyday lives. So that it is a very high stakes, I don't even want to say game, high stakes situation.
Right. So it's kind of like a carrot and stick. Like they'll say you have to, put these bills that we've passed, you have to agree with them in order for us to agree with the budget, and then you can. Yeah. So
that's how those negotiations go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something.
So I appreciate I've been pretty critical of the Democratic Party here in recent months for a slew of reasons that I feel are justified. And I've been less critical of the DFL in part because like you guys are standing up denying quorum. You're not willing to be bipartisan necessarily in this sham game that they're playing. But also like why didn't Curtis Johnson play a little bit more hardball, and why? I mean, because it was insane, like it was ridiculous. They stopped the man for months, and like he had an apartment in the district, and didn't they used to be the same district? Or I mean, they're to me a real Minnesotan, Little Canada and Roseville, where he was living and where he moved to, are the same fucking place. Like there's no difference between those places to me. It's just it's pretty ridiculous. They are very close geographically. I mean, it's the technicality of a technicality within a technicality. I wish he would play a little more hardball. I want to know why is that, and I also want to know like why is the Democratic Party, or maybe they are the DFL in Minnesota here, not pushing for legal action to remove all the Republicans taking part in this sham? This is not upholding their oath of office, right? This is sham. This is in a sense a coup. If they want Curtis Johnson out in special elections, well, I say then fine. We should sue them and have 67 more special elections and see if they can hold their seat the second times around. And why? I mean, I want to see more Democrat hardball, and we're not seeing it all on the national scale. We're seeing a little bit from the DFL, but can you tell me, are you guys planning to play more hardball? Why didn't Curtis Johnson play hardball? How is that
Sure.
going to look?
Yeah, so I'll start off with Curtis Johnson just to say, like, clearly, like, that was, like, a very personal decision that he made. So I don't really want to critique that. I agree, like, the court case details, it was honestly a shock for us that we thought that he had a good case and should have been ruled that he did, in fact, rule in that district and should take it up. And in fact, as you mentioned, the court actually doesn't have a say in who sits in the House of Representatives. That is an advisory opinion, and actually so is the one for Brad Tapke, which is why the Republicans are claiming that they're not going to respect that. So like in one way, I agree with you, but in another way, it's just a complete personal decision there. And I mean, truly, like, I'm sure he was getting death threats. I'm sure he was getting, a lot of things and didn't want to put his family through that. So I don't want to necessarily critique that because that's such a personal decision. But I would also like to follow up on what you said. I do think there are two important things to keep in mind. One is we haven't heard the Supreme Court case yet. I think if the Supreme Court rules that what they've done is unconstitutional, I do think there's certainly a case of moving forward with some of the stuff you mentioned, like recalls for malfeasance, and some other things as well. I also want to point out to people, especially probably who are listening out there, when we say the party, sometimes these things come from the party, but also any citizen of Minnesota can initiate a recall. So there is some responsibility here. If you think your representative has a malfeasance, like, you have the right to initiate a recall and do that as well. So also, like, the party can help, and I have no idea what the plans are there, because each day we're kind of living each day, kind of figuring it out. I agree with you. There should be some repercussions, but also,
I mean, I
the
would love
party
to
is
recall.
people as well.
I would love to recall Nathan Nelson. I called him the other day and told him how much of a piece of shit he is for participating in this whole thing. So how do we go about recalling our representatives? I would love to know the steps to do that.
Yeah, sure. So first thing I would do is, if you have a local party unit, ask them, because you always need more people. The technical way that you go about, you need 25 signatures on a petition saying that you believe that you're a public official. It has to be people that live in your district that believe committed malfeasance of office. And if you get that, you present it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court rules if that is malfeasance or not. If they rule that you have a legitimate case for that, then it goes to a broader petition. Obviously, we don't just want every 25 people to be able to do petitions. And that is, if memory serves, I think you have to get 30% of the voting body in that election to sign a petition for a recall. And that's when it triggers a special election, once those signatures are verified. So that's the process. Obviously, it would take a lot of organizing, but I mean, I do think this is a very serious thing. I do think just pretending at power needs to be something that we say is not something that we approve of. And I mean, all Minnesotans, I think Republicans should be just as aghast. Like, they wouldn't want us to start getting rid of members just because they're Republicans. So, I mean, the other thing I would say is, like, we do have to, this is hard to say because it's a very frustrating time we live in, but I do think we have to believe in the courts. If we just all of a sudden run rush out of the courts and everyone runs rush out of the courts, I do think that's a recipe for disaster. Now, there's a difference of respecting the courts and being, like, willing victims. I don't know how we want to say that, and just, like, not fighting back against things that are unjust. Our country has a long record of celebrated civil disobedience. So certainly that's not what I am saying, that people need to roll back. But also, at a certain point, we have to, the line is somewhere to respect courts and not. And so I think we're writing that line here pretty well. But I mean, I hear what you're saying. I'm really frustrated with the whole situation, the national situation as well. And each day is having to ask those same questions of myself.
Yeah, so I guess I'm learning about this. I'm still stuck on this, the fact that we can call a recall, and I guess it seems like you're suggesting that we should maybe hold back, because I'm pretty sure I have a large enough audience to round up 25 signatures. And I
They have
don't know
to be
about
in
30.
district. Remember, they have to be in district. That's key.
Yeah, I think I've got at least that many people in here. I could get their name on a piece of paper. I don't know about the 30% in the district, but yeah, I do think that that's a good point. I was completely unaware of this, and I think that this is something that maybe the party, maybe people in my position need to be doing a better job of learning about these things and sharing what we as citizens can be doing to help hold people accountable, because a lot of us are feeling incredibly helpless watching everything happen, and then watching our representatives not always represent us the way that we want. I really have that with Pete Stauber and Nathan Nelson here in my district. I'm not represented really at all. But even our Democratic representatives on the federal level, for sure, have been letting us down in a lot of ways. I think we wished we'd seen more opposition, a more vocal voice in pushing back against the fascism that's kind of washing over America right now. And 3 hours into a new administration, and they're Sieg Heiling on stage. Yeah. It's a time where I think we are at a crossroads in the United States. There's a fork in the road, but a lot of people, when we come to these crossroads, are more willing than ever to get involved. And so I hope, is there any resources available for people to learn those kinds of actions that they can take? Because I would have never have known unless you told me and told me it's my responsibility. I'm like, I didn't even know I had the option. Like I
Yeah.
would.
I mean, part of that is like what I said at the beginning is like people,
Mhm.
one of the tools of authoritarianism is always for the people who are consenting to be governed, feeling that they do not have power. We really do. And the clearest way of that, I know this is get frustrating in a long time, is elections, which is why we
Mhm.
focus so much on elections. But even outside of that, there are things to do. So honestly, I would say kind of like my recommendation would be wait till the Supreme Court case determines if this is constitutional or not. That should literally be, I hope, tomorrow or Friday. And once you know that a representative took place in an unconstitutional, willingly took place in an unconstitutional faux House of Representatives and tried to pass laws outside of the Constitution and the government, I think that's malfeasance. And at that point, you can start things. I mean, literally, if you
In the comments, just a second before you go, in the comments, somebody's been asking to explain what malfeasance is, and I was going to type it out, but then I figured, she might not be the only person who's not following the definition. So if you'd be willing to explain.
yeah, so malfeasance is sort of a technical term of like misusing a authority of some kind would be like the broad definition of it. So to use your seat of authority in a way that is like dishonorable or against the oath of office or for your personal gain, or there's a wide range of it. Yeah, so that it's shorthand for like if you did something with your office that is illegitimate, that is harmful. Good catch. Thanks for. And that's the reason I use that word is that's the actual word in the statute. Is malfeasance. It's like a legal definition.
So,
but
Well, okay, so
yeah,
she's asking, like, in general, like, what would make this malfeasance? And I think, I mean, I can answer that. Obviously, holding sham or participating in sham acts of Congress when you don't have quorum, when the Secretary of State said you don't have quorum, who is an elected official, and they're not following the proper protocol, trying to do a power grab that would be illegitimately using their position of office to do something that is both against the Constitution and against the will of the voters. That's a pretty clear cut, in my opinion, definition of malfeasance, and an example of malfeasance that could be um, uh, I think taken forward to the court, and I will definitely be telling people, especially if that court case gets ruled in that way, that this is something that I think every one of us who lives in a red district in Minnesota should be moving forward with, and holding them accountable for that. So I'm excited.
and
for
to be
that.
clear, the Republican Party is running recalls on a lot of us Democratic reps currently. Like I have one in my district. My opponent from last time is running a recall like campaign against me. So this is something that is being done. As far as like how to do it, honestly, the Secretary of State on their website, that's actually a pretty decent website, has like a step-by-step that I kind of ran through, and even has like links to forms that you can use for those kind of things. I would again emphasize. I think the best way to do it would be like if you have connection to you don't have to. There's no reason to do this, but local party units, like what they're good at is hopefully having contacts in unit of fellow minded people who could help with this process. But that is something that's available to the residents of Minnesota.
So, and then you were saying, and this is something that I think a lot of us are struggling with recently, is to have, faith in the courts or respect for the courts. And again, that's been frustrating. It's a little less frustrating on a state level because often, most states elect their Supreme Court justices rather than being appointed like they are on the federal level. So we have a little bit of a hand in that. Unfortunately, it's really hard to do research on who your justices are. There's not a whole lot of resources out for that, which I think is a downfall of maybe the parties, maybe the state, just on how they've ruled, what they stand for. It's really hard to figure that out. But if they do something really malicious, we are allowed to vote them out, and so that's a little bit more reassuring in the court system than it is on obviously the appointed federal level. But on the federal level, it's obviously become very difficult to have faith or respect for the courts when they've legalized bribes for themselves. As long as you don't pay me till after I make the ruling, that's legal. When we've seen that the Supreme Court has investigated themselves and found that they've done nothing wrong, and they don't need any oversight from anybody but themselves because, again, they will investigate themselves and tell you they've done nothing wrong. It's gotten really, really difficult to have any type of respect or faith in the justice system, and how are you maintaining that, or even, I don't want to say the audacity, but how do you have the ability to come out
Yeah.
here and say, we should continue to do that?
Yeah, and I would even like even more historically. I mean, we can say like, especially if you're a person of color, a black man or woman, like the criminal courts have never been fair towards those places all the way back to our founding. So, like a conscious sort of skepticism towards the courts is certainly a healthy thing for a citizen to have. But the question I think to ask is like, what is the alternative? And as far as I see our current landscape, there is not a great alternative to our current court system. Now, actually, hold on, let me back up and say, I think there's really a need for Supreme Court reform. So I think from a basic level, what I would say is turn that anger over the Supreme Court into hopefully democratic action. And that's honestly like push senators, even senators that generally you agree with, if you like our current senators in Minnesota or whoever, like push them for court reform. That's not something that's in the Constitution. The Congress can change at any point how many justices are on the Supreme Court, what their salary is. In many ways, we can force them to have a code of honor. Like there's a lot of stuff we can do. And I'm very disappointed that Democrats, when we had full power in 2020, did not do that. Some of those ways. And I think, by the way, do them in a fair way. People always call it court packing. I do think it would be wrong for all of a sudden to say there's 4 open seats and the president that's in office, gets to fill all those 4 seats. I think we need to depoliticize judicial branch nominations and just have like every president during their 4-year term gets to nominate 2 Supreme Court justices, and then we'll just have that connected once again, rather than like this weird game of like old people trying to stay alive until a president they agree with, or vice versa, or whatever it might be. So that's what I would say there is I don't want to encourage people to have complete faith in the courts, because I think a healthy skepticism is important in a democracy republic. But I also do think we need to channel that skepticism towards forcing our courts to be better in the future. And we did some of those, by the way, the last 2 years in the trifecta in our judicial branch, things like making sure that defense lawyers actually get paid more so we can keep good lawyers actually being public defendants. And there's a lot of like nitty gritty we can get into of how I think we can get better. And we have done better, but it's certainly not where we're at, which is unfortunately true of so much stuff in our country right now.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree. Oh, go ahead.
It's crazy because I think the Minnesota Supreme Court actually has stricter standards defined than the federal Supreme Court. Because
almost every state does. Even like
Right.
Mississippi has a stronger like honor
Sure.
code for their Supreme Court than
Right.
our federal. Right.
I have friends who are lawyers and worked intern for Supreme Court justices for the state of Minnesota, and they're like, they won't accept a plate of Kirkland cookies, from Costco or whatever. Like they will not accept anything, and they'll make a point of it. And it's even as small as something like that.
To accept any gift or offering that is more than $5. So like I've
Sure.
been at events like labor events and gone to a strike, and people hand me a T-shirt and I say I can't take that. Like, and I make $52,000 a year in this part-time legislative job. Like, it is ridiculous what is happening in the federal Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's insane. So, but when you were talking about how there's nothing in the Constitution that enshrines the Supreme Court's authority and the way that it's structured now, and we could, in theory, add justices, we could, in theory, add some sort of accountability. But then the Supreme Court can come and say, no, that's unconstitutional, you can't do that, and that's the law of the land, whether it is or not. Like, and so, like, where does that, how do you do that? Where does that authority come in? Because they've given themselves all of the authority that they currently have over the years and through their rulings. And they've definitely proven that they have no interest in respecting precedent or prior law or even what the Constitution actually says. I mean, even going back to Citizens United and uh, people are corporations are people and money is speech. I mean, there's no basis in the Constitution to support that whatsoever, and yet here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I might quote Jesus here and say each day has enough trouble of its own, and maybe not have to think about potential constitutional crisis. Because this happened before, right? Andrew Jackson famously said, Marshall has made his decision, let him enforce it. Basically, the executive branch doing what you just said the judicial branch could do, right? So there's this, in the history of America, there's always conflict. It's not our fourth grade understanding of checks and balances. It is a constant act. I would love to get to an America where we had a Congress that enacted strict Supreme Court reforms, and then see what the Supreme Court, will do about it. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, as far as like official our system, of course, we could always add a Constitution amendment if you haven't done it in a long time. That's the power that the states and the people have. If that is something that the Supreme Court does, and they can't actually judge an amendment to be non-constitutional because it's part of the Constitution. So I mean, there are levers that we could go, down this hypothetical path, but that's the tension of our experiment that's still ongoing in America.
So, Andy, I'm kind of shifting from the Supreme Court because I think obviously we all know that it sucks. And there's some solutions that Biden put out that are really good kind of starting points that I think kind of went under the radar, in my opinion. But coming back to Minnesota politics a little bit, I have two things that I wanted to kind of get your kind of ideas on. So first thing is Minnesota is one of the few states that doesn't have ballot measure processes at all, really, unless it's I think it basically has to come from the legislature, and then you guys would put out a ballot measure for us to vote on, but no citizen organically created ballot measure process. How do you feel about ballot measures, and do you think that Minnesota could benefit from having more direct voting options on some bills?
Yeah, that's this might be a controversial take because I actually like that Minnesota is not a ballot measure state. I grew up in a ballot measure state in California. Every year there are 10 to 20 propositions that are on the ballot or every 2 years that you vote on. And almost all of them are always things that people just are not equipped in like a good way. Like everyone has their own life and they're living their own life. Like, to have a proposition on water usage go on a public ballot, I think is somewhat irresponsible, and I think goes against the idea of sort of republic government. And an extreme example, I remember back when I was an evangelical, we were all excited in 2008 when Prop 8 came out, which banned gay marriage in California, which is like something that never would have gotten through the actual like legislative process, but a group of motivated Californians that were in the minority on this issue got it on the ballot and then stirred up fear for like a year and a half to get this ballot measure passed. And it was devastating. But then 5 years later, we had Obergefell say that was unconstitutional, as was our nation's not allowing same-sex marriage. And so, like, I think there are wary tales going there. I understand why some people might say, like, we should have the ability to have citizen-led propositions. I mean, ERA might be an example that, like, maybe if we had the whole state that could, like, do that outside of the legislative process, that could happen. But at the end of the day, I think the question is, like, do you believe in democratic representative republic government or not? Because this is kind of a backdoor is really what those are. It's a backdoor to, like, straight democracy, right? That everyone can vote on an issue. So that's kind of my basic take. I could probably talk about this a very long time, but that's where I'm at on that issue.
That's kind of a bold question to ask in today's day and age. Like, do you believe in republic representative democracy or not? At the moment, not doing great with my belief in that. No, I mean, I definitely see your points here, but also like, the same shit's happening with those representatives with less recourse for citizens to take action on it. I don't think that there's a thing as too much democracy. I do think that you know, we definitely need a difference between representative. We can't have just a straight pure democracy, because things like budgets and things like just the day to day, like you require people who are that's their full time job is understanding what's going on and how to write legislation and pass legislation to make everything function because we live in a society that is massive even on a state level and then on a national level. Like we could not vote on every budget and every little thing that creates continuity within government. And then obviously there's just some things that citizens can't have the knowledge of at large for national security reasons and stuff like that on a global scale, and you can't have people necessarily voting on that. But I do think in a lot of situations, especially when you have a Supreme Court, going back to that, removing the protections of Roe v. Wade, and then a lot of states had ballot measures that put those protections in Republican-held areas that were trying to get rid of these things against the will of the people because, once again, our representative democracy is gerrymandered to fuck in many, many states where these people cannot have that accurate representation of what the will of the people is. And so I don't know. I think that there should maybe be some guardrails on ballot measures, but I do think when it comes to direct involvement in people's lives, I it saddens me a little bit that it's not a tool we have to use to fight a lot of the corruption and the lack of representation we have in our state and our country at the moment.
Yep, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable take. Obviously, I've said I would disagree with it, but I don't think that there's like, I don't know, I'm not gonna jump all over you for that for sure. And I will just emphasize to people, like, if you as a representative who does like vote on bills, like almost I can only think of a handful of bills that are just things that I like had an idea on and I just like wrote it and that was the bill. Almost all of them come from either organizations of people who are organizing around a particular issue, or it's like a constituent. Like I've had bills that I got passed that started at a coffee shop because someone was had a question about one particular thing. Those are normally local issues, but like that has absolutely happened. So again, you are not powerless. Like, reach out to your representatives. And it is extremely partisan times, but the other thing you don't see at the Minnesota House of Representatives is there's a ton of bills that actually are bipartisan. They're not the major ones, which is why you don't hear about them. And I am in no way trying to defend Republicans and their often, I think, unjust views on things, but we agree on things as well. We pass infrastructure bills. We pass even things like Medicaid coverages that we agree on. So you are not powerless, even though we are not a proposition state. Reach out if you have a question. Find a group of people who are organizing around something you feel passionate about, and that really does matter. Constitutional amendments, all you need is a majority in the Senate, majority in the House, and the governor to sign it. I shouldn't say only because that's hard, but I mean, like, it's it's doable. We were so close on the ERA last year. And we had one that we passed on this last ballot about our legacy financing. So I mean, like, it happens. But it's certainly not as easy as in a place like California or any other ballot measure state.
Yeah, I guess it's just tough when you see states like Missouri who had a ballot measure reversing an abortion ban, and the majority of people wanted to reverse it, and now their state legislature is not going to figure out a way to actually make that happen. So there's one aspect where I'd love to see, if Minnesotans felt like there was an unjust law, the ability directly and say, like, I want to overturn this law, right? But then, if we had a Republican-led, trifecta, there could be some serious damage done to some things. So I hear what you're saying for sure, and I think the craziness that California has every 2 years with just like tens and tens of propositions is a little bit out of control. So that's fair.
And that actually triggered one other thing I kind of want to emphasize or like bring up as well is, like, we are in an age where people are more and more refusing expertise, right? In things like medical fields and vaccines. And really what Representative
The
Democracy
shape of
says
the
is that
world.
exactly. Is that like there are experts that know more than the general public on these things. Anytime I do a bill, it goes in front of tens and tens of experts and actuaries and budget proposals and all kinds of people having eyes on it, and I don't get it right ever. I've never written a bill that did not have an edit of some kind, and in many ways, and this is not perfect. Again, there should be a healthy skepticism always. But there should be an understanding that there is some expertise going into the bills in legislature that wouldn't necessarily be the case if it was personal. So that's another reason, like, I mean, honestly, there's probably in the next 10 years going to be ballot measures somewhere in the country about vaccines just because of the momentum of that movement. And so that's another thing that kind of keeps me a little bit into the more traditional sense. There's a great James Madison quote, I think it's in Federalist 49, where he says, even if every citizen of Athens was Socrates, those elections would still have been crazy. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But I do think that's like the honest answer is that there is democracy is very, very messy. And so while we protect democratic values, also I think like a government run completely by democracy is also not feasible. So there's certainly some balance there.
Fair enough. And then one other thing that I was curious about, I haven't really even talked to Jordan that much about it, is going off the rails a little bit, is how, so I would assume that generally you would be in favor of some sort of universal healthcare system across the country, sort of like a Medicare for all, but for every, all ages, right? Is that correct, or am I misspeaking?
Oh, yes. How long do you want me to talk about universal coverage? I could do a clean 7 hours on that question.
Perfect. No, that's good enough. So then my question would be is, do you think it's feasible at all, and do you think it would be potentially even a good idea for Minnesota to institute a Medicare for all solution purely for residents of Minnesota? And so I guess it's a two-parter: is A, do you think it's a good idea, and do you think it's actually feasible in any way whatsoever?
Yes, I think it's a great idea. I think it's feasible, but it is going to take a lot of willpower. So right now, okay, I'm gonna try to do this real quick. Right now, we have a couple different systems in place to help people get medical coverage.
Yeah.
One is called MNsure, which is our like marketplace, and you can kind of pick the best thing, and there's parameters of what those plans can be. It's okay. It's still very expensive, but it has helped a lot of people in our state. Then we have MnCare, which is actually our state basic health plan, which is a wonderful plan, but basically you have to live in poverty to get on it. I was lucky enough for 2 years to be on it when I started my business because I wasn't making any money. And we were living off of savings. And so I was able to get on it. It's the best health coverage I've ever had. Both of those are still all through insurance companies. The big one, Blue Cross Blue Shield, all those, like we still run them through them administratively. Something I think we should stop doing, but is a big task to do. Then underneath even that level is medical assistance, which is Medicaid programs, which I can talk a lot about. That is federally funded as well for pregnant people, for children, elderly. Well, Medicare is for elderly. Anyway, so that's more specific. What I would say, this is all to kind of get to this place, is I want that basic health plan to be run by the state, not run through Blue Cross Blue Shield or anything along those lines, and expanded so that there's no income limit and anyone can get into it, even if their employers offer a plan. I think that's the way forward. Is it feasible? Here's the honest answer: is at least initially, it'd be very, very expensive, and we would have to. Taxes would go up across the board. I think the actual like math of that is it would save Minnesotans thousands of dollars in the long term, but the income tax would go up probably for all brackets. So that's what I say. Like it's going to take some real will, but it's completely doable. And I think that's the one thing that we could do that would transform the most Minnesotans' lives. And I'm not even talking about rural healthcare and actual healthcare systems that are failing so many of our greater Minnesota communities. I mean, I live in greater Minnesota. I obviously am in a medical hub in Rochester, so it doesn't necessarily apply to me. But I can drive for 45 minutes, not even like a full hour, and get to places that have like no basic medical coverage that isn't driving all the way back to Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
And that also is something that we shouldn't do. And all of this is connected. And again, I could go 7 hours, so maybe I'll stop there. And if you have follow-up questions, feel free. But that's what
I
I'm
do.
thinking.
I do have one follow-up question because Minnesota did in 2023 introduce a universal health coverage bill for the state, if I'm not mistaken, and it just kind of never went anywhere. And Oregon, obviously Oregon, or whatever, they'll yell at me for saying it wrong like they always do. They just passed one, so like obviously a state can do it. A state did do it, and we did. I'm not mistaken. We did introduce that bill, correct?
There's a couple bills you could be talking about because we did pass a bill to do a study to see what it would cost to switch off of that. That's due in 2026, so that'll still be a year out. There's always bills that are sort of like aspirational, so there might have been one of those that was passed. There was also a public option bill that was, so there's a lot of like things could be referencing. I don't know much about the Oregon one. I'd be curious to see sort of what they're planning to do, so I can't speak to that.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the specific details, but I do know I've heard a few times that they did just pass that, first state in the nation to do it. And being a Minnesotan, proud Minnesotan, I hate getting shown up on progressive shit, so I'm just like, come on, guys, let's get at it. Let's get her done here. Can't have Oregon showing us up.
If anybody was going to, Oregon's not a terrible, it's not like Texas or something, just somehow became progressive all of a sudden.
All right.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
All right. Our little delay here always screws us up sometimes. But yeah, thank you so much. I think we've covered a lot, and I'm ecstatic that you were able to join us here, and it wasn't just Taylor and I talking about trans rights after Leigh left, and we could tie this into Minnesota state politics, let people see a little bit more how the sausage is made and what goes on behind the scenes. I appreciate Andy Smith. He is on TikTok. I don't know if you're on Instagram, YouTube. If you do the other things, I'll let you do your little plug here in a second, but he gives a lot of great information, kind of like a much more localized Jeff Jackson back before he kind of betrayed us on TikTok there. So you go ahead and give us your plugs down there where everybody can follow you and kind of learn the stuff that you're teaching.
Yeah, sure. So on all the socials, I'm at Andy Smith MN, like Minnesota. That's Instagram. Probably most often, and also TikTok. I try to do stuff there as long as that's alive. This is my cat, Minnesota. Another thing I want to plug, since we're on a podcast, is I started a podcast with 3 other representatives in the Minnesota House. It's called New Libs on the Block, and we're really trying to do exactly what you just said, bring people into the rooms where these decisions are made, explain why we make the decisions we make, and hopefully give people a view into that world that they don't normally have. So New Libs on the Block, please go subscribe, like, share, rate, review, all that stuff that YouTubers say.
Cool. So is New Libs on the Block also on YouTube then as well in video form like we do?
We are now trying to do video form, yes. So you can also find, people are on YouTube actually. Just search New Libs on the Block. Of course, after this is done, and then please subscribe and check it out. We just dropped a new episode today actually, so great timing.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely check that out. Please, everybody, check it out. Follow Andy. He is a wealth of information and very, very accessible. We've talked many times, done some lives together before, and I've learned a lot about how my own state legislature works from him, so I really appreciate, even though he's not my representative, he's got no obligations to me whatsoever. We are on different sides of the cities. We might as well be in different states. I don't fuck with south of Minneapolis down there, but we really appreciate.
Yeah, and this is an internal Minnesota squabble. I'm sure he would call us like Northern Iowa or some shit.
Basically, what they are,
Yeah,
I mean,
okay, there it is. I left myself open to it.
I can't really reject your district because you have the Mayo, and we have to keep claiming the Mayo for Minnesota. But all the surrounding areas.
One county down, you're willing to give up.
Yeah. The rest of that, I was wanting to annex them, and I'm like, let them have it. Kind of like those western counties that wanted to go to North Dakota, and I'm like, by all means.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming on. This was really, really fun. I probably got a jet here in a little bit, but truly thank you all for the work you're doing as well.
Absolutely.
It's been a real pleasure, Andy. Yeah, we'd love to have you over again.
Nope.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right,
We
happy
won't hold you longer with
Wednesday.
a longer Minnesota goodbye. Yeah, happy Wednesday.
Out the door into the cold.
Every time.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Obviously, as always, you can support us just by listening and watching. We do get a little bit of revenue just from you guys watching on YouTube, or if you set your phone aside and listen to it there. But if that doesn't work for you, we always just appreciate you listening. If you want to support us more financially, we've got subscription options on YouTube and Patreon. We have merchandise at offtowagon.com, both for the podcast and for my Off to Wagon channel. And then we have ways where you can just send us money if you feel so inclined. We're not too proud to hold the cup out and beg. So this does definitely, it takes us time and money to make, and we do it because we love it. But we live in America, and capitalism is going to capitalism. So that's part of just the reality of doing this stuff. So any support is always appreciated. But as always, we just love that you guys are here and giving us the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, and we love 60 plus people hopping on random time and during the week and just interacting and tuning in, just kind of enjoying the time. So all the listeners, hope you have a good week, and thank you for tuning in.
All right, see you next week.